Är yttrandefriheten på internet hotat? Den frågan svarade professor Michael Shellenberger på i Europaparlamentet i veckan. Riks var på plats och intervjuade Michael Shellenberger om vilka hot han ser mot det fria ordet på internet.
Michael Shellenberger, what is the state of freedom of speech on the internet right now?
It's under threat, and it's a new phenomenon. It's really over the last several years. It's a counter-populist effort by governments around the world who are afraid of populist leaders winning. And so you've seen intelligence agencies, security agencies. In the United States, it was the FBI, the CIA, and the Department of Homeland Security. We've also seen in the Czech Republic, Germany, and Poland, those intelligence agencies using disinformation and demanding censorship before, during, and after COVID. In fact, we saw an incident earlier this year that we documented.
In your speech here in the European Parliament, you talked about that censorship on social media was a backlash from the Trump 2016 elections. Do you think that it will change in any meaningful way now with the social media companies after the Trump election victory this year?
I mean, the biggest change, of course, is that Elon Musk bought X and opened up the files so we could see the censorship that was being demanded by government officials. Since then, I think the platform is much more free than it was, but we are still vulnerable in the sense that we have a very small number of platforms. And I think that ultimately what we need is for governments to say, if you're going to have the special protections that social media platforms have under Section 230 of US law, then you should allow adult users to choose their own legal content. And you can still recommend engines, but they should be separate from that free speech platform.
If you look at the current debate about freedom of speech on the internet, sometimes mostly on the liberal left, they're talking about the need of censorship to combat disinformation, hate speech and so on. Do you see any limitations between absolute free speech and having issues such as people spreading hate speech or disinformation on different platforms?
I mean, we already have a solution to misinformation. It's called accurate information. We have a solution to hate speech. It's love and countering it with free speech. I mean, journalism exists to combat misinformation. So that's the only way to combat misinformation is with accurate information. If you censor the information, then nobody learns anything. So if you really care about misinformation, then you want freedom of speech so you can counter the misinformation. That's why the people that want censorship, they don't care about the truth. What they want is control and power. If you care about the truth, you want an open debate. I would never want to censor my opponents. I would never want to censor anybody that I criticize, because the debate and the disagreement is what makes our democracies real. It's what makes us civilized people as opposed to slaves or serfs living under a dictatorship.
You gave some remarks about the European Union, talking about the Digital Service Act, how one of the French commissioners threatened the Donald Trump and Elon Musk speak, and quite a bit of a large blowback on that. J.D. Vance, for example, Vice President-elect J.D. Vance threatened to pull out of NATO if Europe pulls away from freedom of speech. How come do you think that the European legislators are in a more pro-censorship view than the American right wing at the moment?
Well, because I think part of this is a very strange phenomenon, because it used to be the left that was in favor of free speech. So to see the right taking it up as a cause is potentially very powerful, because you still have at least 30% of the Democrats who are in favor of free speech. So, I mean, look, Europe has a different tradition than we do. Free speech was gradually won over centuries of petitioning the kings to allow more speech. We started with a baseline that free speech came before democracy. Free speech exists as an inalienable natural right. That's the belief that's in our Declaration of Independence and enshrined in our Constitution. So I think that in some ways you're seeing a reversion back to a more authoritarian system, even totalitarian. It's important for people to remember that George Orwell feared that the next totalitarianism after Nazism and communism would come from within the government bureaucracies. So it's emerging exactly from where George Orwell predicted it would emerge from, which is deep inside the European bureaucracy, of people that want power, that are obsessed with power, that are thin-skinned, that are arrogant, and narcissistic, that don't want to be criticized, that are angry at people that say mean things about them on the internet. That's how the kings used to behave. And so you're seeing a reversion back to an older governing model. I think we did well, after through various centuries, the Europeans have fought for freedom of speech, and I think there needs to be that movement again.
And one final question. Do you think this is a regulatory process where politicians need to step in and force social media companies to, for example, not the platform people, they need to guarantee free speech? Or do you think that social media companies themselves can mandate this and try to solve this? What is the foreseeable future? What do you think will happen in the foreseeable future here?
I mean, I think part of free speech is that you can't require somebody to say something that they don't believe. We don't want to have forced speech. On the other hand, if we're going to give the special liability protections to social media platforms, then I think there should be this requirement that all adult users can control all their legal information and follow who they want to follow. They can have any filter that they choose to have. For me, that would be what I would require as part of the law. And if you don't want to do that, then you can be a newspaper publisher like the rest of us and be subject to stricter liability regulations.
You have had a seminar here in European Parliament about free speech, the Digital Services Act and everything. Could you briefly explain what is the Digital Services Act?
Well, the Digital Services Act is actually European law, what we call European law, and it regulates the way how the digital services should handle items on their social media, on large platforms, which are in contradiction to law. And that is mainly the argument that is taken if something is illegal, for instance, child pornography, terrorism, and so on, it should be taken off the platforms very, very quickly. And if the platforms do not comply, they can be punished financially very severely. So that's the theory. In practice, this Digital Services Act is used for censorship, not only for taking away these illegal contents, that is something I think everybody can agree with, but also for censoring ideas that are not popular or that are not convenient to the European Commission or to trusted flaggers, as they are called, who are surveying the internet on behalf of the European Commission, or some NGOs that might feel maybe harassed or whatever. So it's actually an instrument that is very dangerous because it can infringe on your right to free speech.
But how come that the European Commission is having a radically different way of thinking when it comes with the issue of free speech and freedom of speech on the internet and so on? Here they want to regulate a bit more than we had the American counterparts, where they have a more open free speech and everything. What do you think? How come that it has gone that way?
Well, I think it is mainly when things evolve badly, I have a tendency to blame not only those who do it, who introduce censorship because they are feeling weak and threatened and not secure. That's the reason why they censor other opinions. But I also blame people like myself who maybe have not fought enough for their freedom of speech. And what the conference today has also permitted to say very clearly is that we have to have more strength in our conviction, in our fight against the censorship. And that is an impetus that American friends can give us, because now with the election of President Trump, I think that in the United States there will be a rollback on censorship. So in Europe we have a strengthening on censorship. Mrs. von der Leyen has promised democracy shield, which is probably meaning more censorship, and in the United States we have the contrary. So I think that we should now work together internationally with Americans, with others who have the similar problems, in order to fight against censorship on both sides of the Atlantic.